All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, we've already talked a bit about Tara Reade's big sit-down interview with Megyn Kelly and Rich McHugh producing. But in addition to the content of the interview, Tara's choice of venue sent a lot of liberal Biden backers and media figures into a total frenzy. How dare she grant her first interview after Biden formally addressed the allegations to someone who's not even on a major network? How dare she sit with Megyn Kelly, who's not part of the official #resistance pundit team? Now recall, we interviewed Tara a full 42 days ago here. That was back in late March. Spring has arrived here in D.C., flowers are blossoming, and the weather, not so much today, but in general, is turning warm. And during all of that time, all the way up until last week, none of the major networks outside of Fox bothered to even request an interview with the woman who has credibly accused the presumptive Democratic nominee of sexual assault. That is truly stunning. Ben Smith over at the New York Times compared this failing to the disastrous handling by the media of Juanita Broaddrick's credible claim against Bill Clinton when NBC News sat for weeks on an exclusive interview that they had taped with Ms. Broaddrick. In this instance, the media first allowed Biden to have his say, of course, to dictate the terms of when and with whom he would face questions. MSNBC even sent out a press notice alerting everyone that they would actually ask him questions on Tara's allegations, something that in an entire month plus of interviews and press events had yet to occur. And now that the powerful man has had his say, and after they got called out by Ben Smith over at the New York Times, now the mainstream press decided that they must hear from Tara this instant. First of all, Tara did already sit for several interviews with Katie, with Us, and with Democracy Now! She's also spoken with numerous print journalists for any number of publications, but nonetheless, it was treated as somehow fishy that she backed out of an interview with Fox News' Chris Wallace. Tara says that she and her daughter were facing death threats, but in addition, she'd made clear she really preferred to not sit down with Fox News because of the political bent of the network. She didn't want to be used as some political football by a bunch of hypocrites on the right who don't care one bit about Trump's accusers and would never look to interview them. It would be entirely appropriate and understandable for Tara to reevaluate her options when she had more than just Fox available to her. And in reevaluating those options, what would she find? While Fox's ideological inclination is certainly clear, the ideological inclinations of all the other anchors and networks, that's been made pretty clear as well. By ignoring her, not even covering the story on their air, by failing to ask Biden a single question before he declared that he was ready to receive them and gave the media official permission to ask, they showed that they were every bit as political and ideological as Fox. So it makes all the sense in the world that when thinking about where she might go to receive an honest hearing of what she says is one of the most traumatic experiences of her life, an event that Tara described as crushing, that she would effectively say, you know what, none of the above. You all had your chance over the course of a month to reach out, and you didn't do it. I don't owe you one thing. There is another layer to this as well, though. Look, obviously there's quite a documented history of misbehavior by powerful men at a number of these networks, and there's also a documented failure of several of these networks to report on the sexual misconduct of powerful men. Of course, the most notable entrant in that particular category is NBC News, the same NBC News where both Megyn and Rich used to work, which is why it's so perfect that Tara chose this particular duo in order to give her response. Now, we've gotten to know Rich here as a straightforward, old-school journalist who actually believes in following the story, even when that means it is uncomfortable. If you read Ronan Farrow's book, Catch and Kill, you'll also get to know Rich in the context of his work helping Ronan report out allegations against Harvey Weinstein that would, of course, ultimately take him down. And as we've discussed at length here, NBC quashed that reporting in part because of their own vulnerability around Matt Lauer and others within the organization who were accused of their own Me Too issues. NBC is right now being investigated by the New York Attorney General for sexual harassment claims. But of course, Megyn was a relative short-timer at NBC. She really made her career at Fox News, where one of her first big breaks actually came in her skeptical reporting of the Duke lacrosse rape allegations, which did turn out to be false. Her tenure was both successful and at times controversial. Liberals, of course, hated her for a segment she did on whether Santa Claus was white, and, well, they hated her because she was on Fox. She did have an epic moment I'll never forget the night Mitt Romney lost, where she suggested Karl Rove was doing math to make Republicans feel good before sauntering down the hall to get answers from the election number crunchers in the back room. She became an enemy of the Trump campaign after her aggressive debate questioning about women he had insulted led him to declare that she had blood coming out of her wherever. She's basically pissed everyone off at some point or another, which actually gives her a lot of credibility. She can't be pegged as a Trumper or a Biden shill, and she certainly isn't a Bernie bro. It's hard to think of a media figure who you can honestly less readily peg ideologically. And of course, it's also worth noting that while at Fox, Megyn was subjected to horrific sexual harassment by Roger Ailes. She says he discussed her lingerie and even asked for naked photos. Megyn says the repeated harassment made her feel powerless. Now, Megyn was one of the first anchors to ever put me on air, and I can tell you that powerless is about the last word that comes to mind to describe her. And so while legacy media and its acolytes kick and scream about Tara's choice to sit with Megyn, to me it seems perfectly fitting that Tara should choose to sit for an interview outside of the elite media world that has been consistently failing women like Tara and like Megyn for decades. This choice that Tara made was a statement in and of itself.
Yeah, I think it was the right choice, which is that so many of these people dismissed her claims, dismissed allegations, worked on behalf of the Biden campaign, didn't ask Biden about what was going on, and then only when it became a running hot story, remember that from the New York Times editor-in-chief, did they decide to care at all. And so, look, she went to the people who were legitimately there from the very beginning. Yeah, wouldn't it make sense to go to Rich McHugh, because he's one of the first people who ever just returned her phone call and reported on the allegations, took her seriously because he knew how to take people seriously. Same with Megyn Kelly. She was one of these people who has been so consistent on Jeffrey Epstein. We covered her interview with Ashley LaBianco, that fired staffer. She was one of those people who was actually calling about NBC News to release the NDAs. At Fox News, she called out her own employer about sexual harassment and, watched the movie Bombshell together. And they had that whole thing. I mean, she is one of those people who has always been absolutely consistent on this issue. And I think that that's why it makes more sense for Tara to go and to sit with her. And really what it is a commentary on the age that we're living in, which is they don't need you anymore. Like, you're not the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Well, they kept Juanita Broaddrick silent until after the Lewinsky trial and all that was over, because they had a monopoly over control of information. We live in the internet age. Megyn Kelly can upload clips to Twitter, highly produced, well-edited video clips to Twitter and to Facebook or to YouTube. It's going to be on the nightly news because guess what? You got to cover it. Yeah. And that is one of the new and I think it's a very welcome development. In the internet ages, they don't have a monopoly on information anymore. Nope. It's up to all of it. Now, look, I mean, they still have a lot of control, which we cover here all the time, but they don't have a total monopoly, and that's what the real development is.
Yeah, I saw Matt Iglesias out there, too. He's become like the king of wrong takes. Has he always been that way? I don't know. But
well, from my perspective.
He's out there tweeting that, she passed up many major network interviews in order to give this weird one. What's weird about it? I mean, honestly, and if you think through,
that's it.
Right, and if you think through who you could find out there on a mainstream network who is less clearly ideological, like obviously Fox News they find this story very convenient for their purposes. There's no doubt about that. And that's why Tara always was reluctant, even though she got multiple requests from them. She didn't want to sit with Sean Hannity. She was reluctant to go on that network at all because she didn't want to be pegged as like, oh, you're just doing this to help Trump. But those were the only requests that she had gotten up to that point, which is outrageous. And by failing to reach out to her, by failing to even care to hear her story before giving Joe Biden his chance, he announced, and here's the other thing, like that you get to announce, okay, I'm ready to take questions. Let's go ahead and do this. And the media just plays along with that, doesn't ask you one question until you explicitly grant them permission. So he gets to have his say, and then suddenly you're interested. Oh, and by the way, not only are you interested, but you demand that Tara sit down this instant, right, with basically the anchor of your choice. Like, they completely expose their own ideological bias by those choices that they made. So why should she sit with them? She doesn't need to. She doesn't owe them anything.
No.
She's already given multiple interviews. That's the other thing I saw, is that this idea that she's like ducking mainstream interviews. She's spoken with so many journalists for the Washington Post,
you can call her on the phone.
For the New York Times, for Fox. I mean, she's spoken with all of these mainstream journalists over months at this point. So the idea that she's like ducking or hiding anything is ridiculous. Not to mention, If you want a softball interview, is Megyn Kelly the person you sit with?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Megyn doesn't let anyone off the hook. Like, whatever you think of her, and she's pissed off everybody across the ideological spectrum at this point. You don't sit with Megyn Kelly because you want a softball interview. It's a ridiculous idea.
That's why I've always loved her journalism, her interviews. She never let anybody off the hook. Always was deeply skeptical. And you can see in there, I mean, she presses her on different things about
She does.
polygraph. Would you do this? Would you do that? And it's very clear that this was not some sort of softball, that she did grill her. I expect to see in the full thing. And most of these people are just jealous and they're hypocrites because Tara Reade had the audacity to go to people that she trusted, and that's not the mainstream media.
They're entitled, and they have not had control of this story from the start. They didn't want to talk about these allegations. They didn't want to have to deal with this at all. That didn't work because outlets like us, The Intercept, Katie Halper, like other outlets outside the mainstream were covering the story. That forced them to have to deal with it, and they want it all to be on their terms. They feel entitled to be able to control this narrative, and Tara basically opted out of it.
Yeah,
Kudos to her. All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.